To start this story off and give a little insight about me, I'm an 18-year-old female who grew up in Michigan and has lived in the country for as long as I can remember. This is a long story, so bear with me. On a particularly hot summer weekend, me and a couple friends, including my boyfriend Tony and my older brother Brad, decided we were going to go camping for the weekend. It was such a nice week that we figured we couldn't stay home. Tony's parents had owned a cabin way out in Ludington, surrounded by a huge wooded area with a personal lake and no neighbors for 4 miles. Being stupid teenagers, we didn't really think about that. All we were ready for was to party like any normal teens would. After being there for 2 hours, our fun had started. Tony's friends brought tons of alcohol to last for the weekend so we wouldn't be bored since we had no service and only movies to watch. After it was around 12 a.m. and pitch black, we had a huge bonfire going. It was a total of 6 people, including me and Tony. As we talked and laughed about upcoming events in our lives, we were so distracted, we didn't even notice that my brother had his eyes frozen on one section of the woods. Mind you, we were all intoxicated at that time. Eventually, our talking ceased when Tony realized his friend and my brother had an emotionless expression. "Hey dude, are you alright?" he asked Brad. Silence. Brad didn't reply or even make any movements that would indicate he heard him. After that, I started to get scared, as well as the 2 other girls. It took a lot for my brother to act that way. Eventually, I was the first to catch on, and he was excessively staring into a certain spot in the woods. I turned my head and followed his gaze the best I could. And when I finally caught on to what he was staring at, my heart dropped. There, right there, was at first look what looked to be a dog. At least, that's what I thought. It was some person's dog that wandered off. It had to be. But then my brain kicked in, and I realized there weren't neighbors for miles. So how could there be a dog there? My mind started to race while Tony tried to get Brad to speak or even move. In one motion, this thing stood up tall. And when I say tall, I mean gigantic. It had to be at least 6 feet tall. Everyone had seen it then. How could you not? The other 2 girls and the other boy gasped as they finally grasped why my brother was as still as a stick. No one moved for what seemed like hours. Tony was the first to talk. "No tail," he mumbled. No one heard what he said except Brad, and I swear to you, when I say his eyes widened as big as pan saucers, that freaked me out immediately. "What did you say?" one of the girls asked. "It has no tail," he hissed at her. My heartbeat stopped. He was right. There was no tail on this thing. Suddenly, my clouded alcohol mind cleared up in a fraction of a second when I finally realized what this thing was. I understood why my brother was as still as he was. This thing was a skinwalker. My instincts kicked in right then and there, but before I could get the hell out of there, this thing let off a terrible stench like rotting death before screaming inhuman-like. The sound was enough to scare everybody. My brother was the first up out of his chair and started shouting native words to the creature, while I told everyone to get inside. No one questioned me when they'd seen just how dead serious I was, especially Tony. He'd never seen me so scared, so he knew it was a bad situation. We all hightailed it into the cabin, with my brother still in tow, shouting native words at the creature. It seemed to keep it at bay, while it gave us enough time to get inside. He slammed and locked the door before turning all the lights off. Grabbing a special ash from the kitchen counter, he started throwing it at every window and door while he chanted. Of course, he had everyone freaked out and basically in tears at this moment. After he was done, no one said a word for a long time. All of us, still in shock, just waited. He grabbed the weapon and had it posted by him for hours. Everyone was entirely too shaken up to even question what happened. We must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke up to my brother packing our stuff in the 2 cars early in the morning. I understood why. We had a native family. We knew what we were dealing with, and we knew it would come back, and maybe not alone. Before we left, I did a blessing on the cabin and spoke a few calming words to the very freaked out girls. We left as soon as everything was packed up. To this day, we still haven't explained exactly to our friends what happened that night, and they never even bothered to ask us either. I'm looking for a logical explanation to my experience. A couple of days ago, my boyfriend and I were driving up the road in the middle of the woods. We turned a corner and we saw a deer. The deer didn't even flinch at our car coming up the road. That's what weirded us out. Deers usually see light and they start running, but this one stayed still. Then we saw it. I'm not normally a scared person, but seeing this thing made me feel very uncomfortable. It looked as if there was something talking to the deer. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, very thin, and it was all black, with wings. It flew up right in front of the car, and my boyfriend slammed on the brakes. He turned to me and said, "Tell me you saw that," and asked me to describe it to him to make sure he wasn't going crazy. I did, and we sped all the way home. This all happened in about a minute, although it felt way longer than that. I was telling my dad about it, and he said he saw the exact same creature years earlier at my sister's bus stop. He tried to convince my sister it was a garbage bag or something, but my sister's response was, "Daddy, that thing was too fast and too big to be a trash bag." And all my dad could say was, "I don't know." If anybody has any idea what it could be, I'd appreciate if you tell me. I'm very skeptical about these things, and I'm looking for a more logical explanation, but I don't know if I'll ever find one. It almost doesn't make sense to tell anyone what I saw, because nobody but my boyfriend would believe it. Whatever it was looked like it was talking to the deer. It looked like it could communicate, but it didn't look human. I still choose not to believe what I saw, but after hearing what my dad told me about the past situation, maybe I should believe what I saw. My first experience with the supernatural was one of the most terrible life experiences I can remember. It happened when I was young and dumb and wanted to go out into the world and explore. While I was out of my home country of Canada, I witnessed a horror I'd soon hoped I'd forget. I'd gone on a trip with some of my buddies to Montana just below my home province of Alberta. We were originally going to stay in Yellowstone National Park, but decided to head to Glacier National Park first. We were going to camp out at Yellowstone for a few days. We finally reached Glacier Park after a 6-hour drive and had just enough time to do a little hiking before going to our hotel in the nearby town to rest and move on towards Yellowstone. We had gotten to the park around 4:30 p.m. and decided it was a great idea to hike after dark. When I said great, I mean sarcastically. I'm not sure why we decided to go in the dark. So we hiked up the trail looking at the glorious views of rivers and waterfalls and all in the Avalanche Creek Trail. The light began to fade rather quickly. We were only about 2/3 of the way up and we'd hiked into the trail about 10 kilometers. To come back, it would take us about 2 hours to walk back down from that point. This is when everything hit the fan. Myself and my friends were all outdoorsmen, and we loved to go hiking. We'd travel around the Rocky Mountains, but we were still inexperienced when it came to night hiking. Since the trail we were on wasn't as traveled at this part of the hike, it was hard to follow in the dark. Every now and then we would see a sign that notified us we were going in the right direction. At some point, maybe a third of the way down the mountain, we ended up going off trail, following a little rabbit trail, thinking we were still on the correct path. We began to figure out that we were definitely not going the right way. My friend checked his compass, showing we were heading deeper into the Rocky Mountain miles. We were going into the forest when all we wanted to do was get out of it. Then began the mass panic. My friends and I immediately turned around and began walking the way we came. The trail we were following didn't look the same as it had before, leading us to believe that we may have been even more lost than we already were. That's when we collectively noticed how quiet it had gotten. There were no insects, no birds, nothing. It was dead silence. I knew this was a bad sign, as I'm a hunter, and when it gets quiet like this, it means there's a large predator around and that it's hunting. We'd literally become prey to an unknown beast in the woods. We all began getting a sudden spike of anxiety when I let the guys know what was actually happening. That's when we heard a noise that brought terror, a guttural howl from up the mountain, and it was followed by even more. My heart went into my throat, and the terror I felt made me shake. Most of my friends did the same, but all of them, except 2, had already dipped and had began running in the direction the opposite of the howl. We'd all followed soon, and after running ourselves ragged, we looked behind and saw the eyes of something that was much larger than we anticipated. The eyes were at least 6 feet off the ground and moving towards us fast. We split up running in random directions, hoping to lose the beast. It was never going to happen. I could hear the breath of one of these things about 20 feet behind me and gaining. All of a sudden, my friend appeared from the trees to my right, and we ended up running together until I cut off from him. Hoping to escape, I know I left him to die that night, but it was a last-ditch effort that worked out in my advantage. I heard his screams from my left and ran as fast as I could away from them. Tears rolling down my face, I hear his screams for help and hear him shrieking in pain and know that nothing could have been done about it. I continued running down the mountain until I saw a familiar sight ahead of me. It was one of the trail signs showing how far you were on the trail. I stopped, checking where I was, and then started running again. I was hoping to get away from the creatures in the mountain. Another kilometer down the trail, I began hearing howls getting closer and closer yet again. This caused me to run as fast as I could. Looking ahead, I saw the sign saying parking lot and zoomed past it in panic. Looking for my keys in my pocket and scrambling towards the only vehicle still left in the lot, which was my car, I used my fob to unlock the car from a distance and run as hard as I could, slamming the side of my door and hopping in it. Starting the car, I looked out my window towards the trail and saw 2 pairs of eyes staring at me. Just out of the range of the lamppost, they stared at me before disappearing back into the brush as I drove away and never looked back. I arrived at the ranger station by the park entrance and ran inside looking disheveled and terrified. I began telling the ranger at the station what had happened. He looked at me with a sad face as if he knew that this would happen. He called up the search and rescue team to come in the morning to look for my friends. They were never found. This happened to me when I was 11 years old, and I'm now 13 and still remember it as clear as day. I basically lived in the middle of nowhere, so I didn't have many friends. There was this huge forest though, so I would often play there. One day, I went to go play, and it was almost around 6:30, so it was kind of dark. I lived in Wisconsin at the time. I went deep into the forest and everything was good until 7 p.m. rolled around. I was used to hearing weird noises in the woods, but nothing like this. I heard this awful scream, not human-like either. It was demonic, like it scared me. I was curious, so of course I went to go investigate it. I got around maybe half a mile in when I saw this non-human-like creature perched in a tree. Instead of running for my life, I froze in shock and fear, and before I knew it, that thing, that awfully smelly creature, was right behind me. I wanted to scream for help, but I didn't. I didn't know what that creature could do to me, so I stood there like a rock, hoping it would leave. It screamed again, but even worse than the first time, and I felt like I was gonna go deaf. Eventually, after minutes of it staring at me, it flew, and I mean flew, up to the tree. I stood there, looking at it, for what felt like hours. I wanted to pull my phone out and try to blind it with the flash so I could make a run for it. So that's what I did. Now, did I mention I was a little chubby for my age, so I couldn't run fast, and that caused the creature to jump and run after me. As it chased me through the woods, I felt the world spinning around me, and I screamed for help. The creature caught up with me eventually, and I felt like my life was over. I made a dash for the bushes, hoping to be able to hide in one, which I did. Now I waited for half an hour thinking he was gone, and I made a dash to the door, hoping it wasn't behind me. Instead, it was perched on the air conditioner. I told my parents that very night, and they called me crazy, but I know what I saw, and I'm never going in those woods again. Monsters are real, and I don't know what that creature was, but who knows what it would have done if it got its hands on me.
My name is Jason. This is what happened when I was about 16 years old. I'm 27 now, and what happened that day would change everything. I live in West Virginia, where there's mountains all around, so I grew up in the woods, hunting, camping, riding ATVs. So one day, me and two of my friends Brian and Jesse, we went out to our ATVs to find a place to camp that weekend. This was Thursday, and we wanted to find a place to camp on Saturday. We went pretty far into the woods to try and find the best spot we could because we were bringing our girlfriends camping with us. So we got probably 5 or 6 miles back into the woods and found this little lake, and we all knew we'd found the spot for the weekend. We got off our ATVs and checked everything out to make sure it wasn't private property or anything, but there were no signs and there wasn't a house around for miles. "This is it," Jesse said, and we all agreed it was perfect. So we all get back on our four-wheelers and head back, knowing that Saturday was going to be a night to remember. But what we didn't know was that it would be the worst night of our lives. So we got back the next day. We got all of our gear loaded up. Fishing poles, tents, sleeping bags. We made sure we had everything we needed to make it a fun night. This included 3 bottles of Mad Dog and a 30-pack of Bud Light in a cooler. We were ready. We all met up at 11 o'clock Saturday morning and headed out to our perfect camping spot. When we got there, it was great. We put up all the tents, got the firewood, and set everything up. The girls loved it too, except Brian's girlfriend, Kat. She said she felt uneasy, but we figured it was because she'd never been camping before. We started fishing and swimming and drinking, just doing everything teenagers usually do. But Kat, she just kept looking around, and she wouldn't join us by the lake. Finally, it started to get dark, so we started a fire and made some hot dogs and just sat around talking about stories, everything you do when you camp. It's about 11:30 when Sam, who was Jesse's girlfriend, said she was going to pee, and Kat went with her. They were gone maybe 4 minutes when they came running back, saying Kat saw something behind a tree watching them. I grabbed my weapon that I brought with me, and me and Jesse went to check it out. We didn't find anything, so we thought the campfire stories probably just freaked them out. We got back and we told them we didn't find anything, but Kat said she knows what she saw, and she wanted to leave. We got her to chill out, and me having a weapon kinda put her mind at ease. After about 30 to 45 minutes, we were all ready to lay down and spend some time alone with our significant others. And no one is even thinking about what Kat saw anymore. I wish we would have left because about an hour goes by and my girlfriend Lindsay was asleep. But I was there, laying and listening to the sounds of the woods when I started to hear footsteps. At first, I thought it was the others, but I couldn't tell who it was walking, and they were trying to do it really quietly. The footsteps stopped at my tent door. I started to freak out inside, but didn't make a sound. They just stood there for 3 minutes, and then I saw the zipper starting to slowly unzip. I went to grab my weapon when I realized I left it by the bag. So stupid, I was thinking. The zipper moved about 6 inches slowly when Lindsay coughed, and it stopped. She stayed asleep, and she didn't know someone or something was trying to break into our tent. I heard nothing for about 5 minutes, and then the footsteps again, but sneaking away from the tent. I can't move, and I was terrified. So all I did was stay quiet and hope it didn't come back. 30 minutes passed when all of a sudden the most crazy sounding evil scream I've ever heard came from the next tent over, and it was Brian and Kat's. They started screaming. I jumped up, running out of the tent, and Lindsay is awake now, so I ran right to my bag for the weapon. Lindsay, right beside me, still terrified, not knowing what was going on. I grabbed the weapon and looked at their tent, and what I see still haunts my dreams to this day. This pale, white, long arms with long claws at the end of the long fingers. It looked like a humanoid type of thing, just taking chunks out of Brian, biting him. I used the weapon, and it looked up, and its yellow eyes just stared into my soul. I was shaking as it started galloping towards us, with Lindsay screaming. I used the weapon again, and it took off into the woods screaming that god-awful scream. We ran up to their tent, and Jesse and Sam had seen it all. They saw what was happening, so we started to run. But for Brian and Kat, it was too late. They were both torn up. I couldn't even tell who was who. The girls were crying, and Jesse puked, and I felt like I was in a nightmare. I had Lyme tunnel vision, and I was scanning the woods, hoping whatever that was didn't come back. Jesse and the girls were all huddled up next to me, and we made our way to the ATVs. I was looking into the woods the whole time, with my weapon pointing towards that way the thing ran off. We got to the ATVs, and I realized the keys were in the tent in my pants pocket. About that time, we heard that thing scream again. I told them to wait there, and I had to go back and get my keys. I didn't have a choice, as much as I didn't want to go back. I ran as fast as I could to the tent to grab the keys and turned to run back, and there it was. It came straight out of the woods, running right at me as I raised my weapon and I started hitting it. I hit it because it yelped and it screamed and it turned and ran back to the woods again. I ran back to the ATVs, and we rode out of there so fast that I'm surprised we didn't wreck it. We went right to the cops and told them everything that happened. They went up to where we were. They came back after what seemed like forever and took us back there with them. By this time, it was lights out. We got back there, and everything was destroyed. The tents were ripped up, the stuff was thrown everywhere, and they took me to Brian's tent, and there was blood everywhere, but no bodies. The cops said, "Where are they?" And I said, "I don't know. They were here when we left, but that thing must have took them." Then, they started saying it looked like a bear did this, and tried to say we were drunk, and must have been mistaken about what we saw. I know what I saw, and whatever that was, it wasn't even close to looking like a bear. It's over 10 years later, and Brian and Kat's bodies have never been found. It was wrote up as a black bear attack. I never talked about it to anyone. Jesse and Sam got married and moved to Florida. Lindsay moved too, but we broke up not long after that happened, so I don't even know where. What still gets me is whatever that was, it was at our tent first, but Lindsay coughed and it went to Brian and Kat's tent. What I can tell you is whatever that thing was, it certainly was not a bear. The cops wrote it down as us being drunk, and maybe there was roughhousing going on. They never wanted to get to the underlying issue of what that thing really could have been. And since then, I haven't heard many stories about anything like that happening again. But what I do know is that Lindsay's cough saved my life. So I have nobody to thank but her.